For all those of you who don't know me, my name is Oliver Gingrich. I'm a researcher at the National Center for Computer Animation, and I'm working alongside Paula Callus on the ReSpace project. So a very warm welcome to the ReSpace Symposium, which will present you with artists, researchers, and the key themes of the ReSpace project, including concepts of space, place, and memory. I'm now handing over to Paula Callus, the Associate Professor at Bournemouth University and the PI of ReSpace, to tell you briefly about the project.
Okay, hi everyone. Thank you for joining us on the ReSpace Symposium. This is just a really brief introduction to the project, just to contextualize the symposium for you and as a forward to our guest speakers. Obviously, later on, I'll be going into a little bit more detail actually about the project and how we ran the project and all of its elements. But in a nutshell, ReSpace is part of an AHRC-funded Changing the Story project, which is led by Leeds University. The project has partners in Rwanda and in Kosovo, and also obviously ourselves at Bournemouth University. And we're working together really, as Oliver mentioned, to look at concepts of space and place, and using the site as a means to think about history and memory. And we do so by working with young people, and more importantly, by looking at art-based participatory methods, which is why, if you like, for us, it was really important for the symposium to have guest speakers from architecture and from the arts to, if you like, introduce their own ideas and how their work connects to place and space. So I probably go into more detail later, and I'll leave it at that for now, if that's okay.
Yeah, so then just a couple of quick words about the structure of today's symposium. We are extremely excited to have several esteemed speakers, including artists and researchers from Kosovo, Rwanda, Nigeria, and the UK. The first speaker will be Bekim Ramku, and he will be followed by the activist and artist Ayo Akinwande. And then Paula will be presenting the context of the ReSpace project in more detail. We will then have a short break, and we will then hear from Amelie Ngulirwa from the University of Rwanda and the sociologist Assumpta Mugiraneza from the Iriba Center for Multimedia Heritage. And the presentations will be concluded by the artist Susan Sloan from Bournemouth University and Alfred Mukhilwa from ADMA, Africa Digital Media Academy, before we have a panel discussion on the key subjects of the symposium, place, space, and memory. So it is my honor to introduce our first speaker, Bekim Ramku. Bekim established the Kosovo Architecture Foundation. They are the organizers of an annual festival which presents key names from the world of architecture, design, film, and other art disciplines. The CAF activities are supported by the Getty Foundation, by the EU MIES Award, and the Aga Khan Foundation. Bekim is one of the founders of the Future Architecture Platform, which represents a network for exchange of ideas of some of the most difficult questions that the society is facing nowadays. Bekim is also a recipient of the Big C Architecture Visionary Award 2020, and his new artwork, Pristina Public Archipelago, is exhibited at this year's Venice Biennial. Yeah, we're very excited to have you here today, Bekim. I'm going to hand over to you.
Thanks, Oliver, and thanks, Nida, for the invitation. It's an honor to present in front of you the Pristina Public Archipelago project and study. So basically, in end of 2019, we were invited by Hashim Sarkis, the dean of SAP, the School of Architecture and Planning at MIT, who's also the curator of the architecture exhibition at the Venice Biennale, to do a study on the city, on Kosovo or the region, because at that time it was very short notice. We basically decided to do a study on Pristina, but not spread it through the whole city, but concentrate on the center. So we basically chose this theme of archipelagos, of the archipelago, and identifying several islands in the city, public islands, which form this central archipelago in Pristina. We based our study on the premises that regardless of political regimes, public spaces are of vital importance for the well-being of societies, in particular those that survive bloody regimes and aspire to become democratic. We based these premises on the seminar that Gadimeos Urbanos, the professor at MIT School of Architecture Planning, and the MIT Media Lab did in 2014, which was questioning what publicness is and how it's perceived. Our study analyzes the social, political, and spatial dimensions of this islands: the Bashkin-Blaznimi Square, Kino Armata, Rilindia, Grmia, Grand Hotel, and Bororamis. For the study itself, produced a book where you can see the content. So we have like text on all the archipelago, on all the islands, as well as and other similar case studies throughout ex-Yugoslavia, like Podgorica, Belgrade, Zagreb, Koper, Sarajevo, as well as Tirana. We also did a documentary, which unfortunately I can't show to you, but we'll have in the end of the presentation a sneak peek, which can also be found in the Biennale website, which was directed by myself and Gaz Bairi, who's in the picture, the dude. And basically, it's an unnarrated documentary which visits all the spaces we talk about, apart from Grmia, which wasn't accessible for us. We also have a website. If you go to archipelagopr.com, you have all of the text, apart from the main text, which is published in one of the Biennale books, edited by Hashim Sarkis. You have all of the texts that are in the book, and also we're trying to we're going to also update it with a red prints or the blueprints of all of the buildings. So as I mentioned, we looked at these 6 sites. I'm going to leave Grmia out of this presentation because it was more about the future use of Grmia. So what we did is, for example, we started the study with Brotherhood and Unity Monument, which is actually this modernistic square, like the first square in socialist Kosovo, and in the city. We analyzed the JNA, Yugoslav National Army headquarters, where now we're actually doing this presentation from Armata Cinema. We analyzed the print house, the printing section of the Rilindia, Grand Hotel, Bororamis, and Grmia, as I said. So I'm going to start with Bashkin-Blaznimi. So Bashkin-Blaznimi, or the Brotherhood and Unity Square, is actually the first modernistic project in ex-Yugoslav Pristina. So it was actually initiated just after the war in '46, but it finished the beginning of the '60s. And the square itself, or the main features of the square, were also like part of the Pristina identity. It was the part of the Pristina radio television. As well as the city, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. So the sign of the city. So the square itself is used for many purposes. It was refurbished in 2014, but we overlooked that. We speak more about the meaning of the square and how it came about, and as well as its potential. In the book, you can find more about the square from a text by Norby Naka, who's also the deputy director of CAF. Just erase some images of the space. The second building we were looking at is Bororamis. That's a youth and commercial space in Pristina, which was this blown up version of the social condenser. Which was presented in ex-Yugoslavia just after the Second World War by the Soviets. It was adapted by the Yugoslavs, which in 1 year, in '46, built more than 1,000 of them throughout ex-Yugoslavia. Some some around 150, 200 were built only in Kosovo. And they're known by different names. So it's Dom Kulture, Špijata Kulturas, Zadruge, and so forth. So basically, like the Bororami's, we analyzed what the initial use of the space was. We have like these diagrams that show in details what the spaces were originally meant for. As well as current functions. So we look at all of these spaces through the lens of all the events that happened in Kosovo throughout the 90s, throughout the apartheid, and then just after the 99 war. So how these spaces were privatized or semi-privatized by the privatization agency of Kosovo, and how in a way, these spaces became even more diverse than they were initially meant. I mean, their use. Some pictures of the space. Then the third site we're looking at is Grand Hotel, which again was like this jewel of the city, which after the 99 war was actually once privatized and then returned against the privatization agency. There was different initiatives within Grand that looked at the space and how this space could be turned into more public for non-commercial use. So there are a lot of events that are held there. There are exhibitions. There are also festivals and so forth. There was also an initiative by Birn and Vesa Sachi, if I'm not mistaken, that tried to actually gather all of the collection of artworks in Grand and to exhibit it permanently within the ground floor or the basement area. Again, we analyzed the original use, we analyzed the current use, and then we basically did this spatial analysis also through imagery. So you can basically see what the private owner tried to do at the building. Then there's this story which we didn't want to reflect that much in the exhibition at Venice, which also tells the story during the 90s and also 1990s and the 1990 war, where this space was actually used as a space for torture and rape. Then again, we look at this privatization of the space, its current state. So you basically have there, you have a gym, you have a fight club, you have this cafe, which was actually the Grand Cafe. It's still owned by the workers that used to work in Grand Hotel in the 80s and post-war. And you also have a makeshift mosque, something very similar to what the V&A is doing at the Biennale. Another space we're looking at is Kino Armata and more on the lens of this initiative by Aljosh and his friends that basically tried to turn this space that was exclusively used by the army and post-war by ULAX and UN mission in Kosovo to turn it into a public space. So again, like not so many drawings on this building because we didn't actually have access to other parts of the space. But again, we speak about this building and how this is being regenerated for the public use. So in the book, we have a text by Aljosh Gosh, who speaks about how they basically started the work and how they managed to turn this space into a public space. Some images of the Armata. Then we also look at Relindia. So on Relindia, on the book, we have two texts. One is by Kuite Melezi, who speaks more about like this history of Relindia, more about its aesthetics rather than like importance. And then we have another text by the Hapsira duo, by Arbnor and Uran, who speak about their struggle to turn Hapsira event into a permanent space in Relindia. So like again, producing this cultural non-commercial space for public good. Again, we analyzed the original use of the space and the current one. Images of the space. This was just before we were actually banned by the privatization agency to enter the space once they found out that we're actually doing a study on these spaces, and they saw, I guess, an article in a local newspaper telling our story that we actually portray the privatization agency as one of the most corrupt agencies, public agencies in post-war Kosovo. Some images of the Hapsira events, and then this was the cleanup which was being done by the privatization agency. Basically taking all spaces apart so they could use it for their own offices. And then just to kind of explain to where the Pristina Public Archipelago is situated within the main exhibition. So we're actually the first group of architects from ex-Yugoslav region that was invited by the curator to be part of the main exhibition. And we're part of the section Cohabitats, where you have schools such as ETH, GSD Harvard, MIT, Hong Kong University, and the Sao Paulo University exhibiting their studies on these cities. So you have a study on Beirut and Hong Kong. You have a study on housing in New York. You have a study by Azrak Shamia on the Zatari camp. Then you have a study by Andreas Lipek on the public infrastructure in Sao Paulo and Rio de Janeiro. And you have another like 3 or 4 exhibitions within that section. Our study was basically displayed very simple. It's the documentary that's the main feature. And we also exhibited 3 copies of the book where you can kind of read part of the study. We basically are part of the main exhibition book, but as well as the Cohabitats book, which is edited by Ala Tanir and Hashim Sarkis, co-produced by the Venice Biennale MIT Press, which looks at all these cities that I mentioned earlier, and which has the main text of the book, which is also featured on the Pristina Public Archipelago book. I would also like to share the sneak peek with you. So this can also be found on the Biennale website, but just don't read the text there because they made a mistake, so you can't understand. Do I need to put the sound on, or I just can play it? Because it has, yeah. presentation for you.
Fantastic.
Can you hear?
Thank you so much, Bekim. I think the video has ended. Yeah, thank you so much for this absolutely incredible talk. So interesting also to see how you're connecting the locality of this site to these ideas of memory and history, and also how you're working on talking about different cultural uses. So yeah, absolutely incredible project. Thank you so much. We will have time for Q&A later on. So I will now hand over to Ayo Akinwande, our second speaker. Ayo is an artist, curator, and writer from Lagos, Nigeria, with an academic background in architecture. His artist is multidisciplinary, working across lens-based media, sculpture, installation, sound, and performance. Ayo Akinwande co-curated the 2017 Lagos Biennial and was also participating artist. In 2019, he presented solo exhibitions in Nigeria, Scotland, Cuba, for the 13th Biennial de la Habana. Ayo was a finalist for the 2018 Art X and ABSA Atelier competition, and the recipient of the 2020 Edith Russ House Media Art Grant, and the Fonderie Darling Montreal awarded in the 2019 Case Public Prize. He has exhibited in solo and group exhibitions across Africa and beyond, and we're very excited to have Ayo here today. Thank you so much, Ayo, for joining us.
Thank you very much, Oliver. I need to share my screen. One second, please.
Can you share your screen?
Oh, yeah. I'm trying to share my screen now.
If you want to. Yeah.
Okay. 1 second. Okay, so computer. All right. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you for the invitation to be part of this. Thank you, Oliver. Thank you, Paula, and everyone is part of the programming. My name is Ayo Akinwande, as Oliver said, and I work across these different titles. Depends on who is asking. So as part of this presentation, I'm going to be focusing on 3 projects that I've been working on. And one is really like looking at the idea of space in the context of domesticity, living spaces, housing. The second is looking at environmental space. And then the third one is looking at space in the context of spirituality. So Face Me and Face You basically is a work I've been working on, looking at in the context of COVID-19, where lots of questions have been asked about the idea of what does it mean to cohabit in spaces, and the area of social distancing. And in the definition of Face Me and Face You, just in very simple terms, you have rows of rooms facing each other, and then enclosed with the toilet and the bathroom at the rear. And what happens in these spaces, it's sort of like it's constant friction happening on different activities. It's so not curated. And so this is like a generic floor plan. So it's just to give us an idea of how these spaces have been designed. And in the context of social distancing, we really get now familiar with these measurements, like 1.5, 2 meters. And in architecture, we use anthropometrics as a way to sort of like inform design spaces. That's why certain parts of the houses are much bigger than other parts based on the human interaction there. But in this context of Face Me and Face You, it's really the human body that is now made to fit into the existing design. So the buildings are not designed for your comfort, so to speak. But then you have to then work within what you have. So the question happens is when you sort of like exist in these very tight spaces in the context of social distancing, in the context of where you have to be responsible, keeping distance, what is then the implication for those who exist in the spaces as against those who can have access to greeneries and posh environment. So this is a slide, just a quick video, to sort of like gives us an idea of what um, on the left side of the screen. The left side of the screen is an existing photographic documentation of a particular building that I lived in, and on the right is the digital reinterpretation of the same space. So my background is in architecture, and then in architecture school, you're sort of like taking through a whole lot of conversations. But my understanding of architecture has really been informed in the spaces I have had to live in, and then another. So I kind of like came up with this sort of like a three-dimensional drawings or design. It kind of like gives you an idea of what it looks like in a generic sense, and how the spaces are kind of like structured in a way that it works for everyone. And one of the things that's very interesting in this space is how sort of like everyone is involved in everyone's businesses. And this idea of how the occupants are constantly changing. And then the building becomes a sort of like an archive space where you have all of these stories, stories of different tenants, stories of the building, stories of what's happening in different rooms and different households. And then it's just kind of like you're constantly eavesdropping, and in a way that privacy is not really the conversation, but then it's more about communal living and how people can kind of like exist in a space where despite the frictions, you can always find common grounds. And um, and then in that context, then you start to think about public housing as sort of like hotspots. Like, what does it mean when you have densely populated buildings, and then what does that also mean in terms of like viruses, in terms of safety? Because then, from the architectural sense, safety, it's takes a different undertone from the healthcare conversation around safety. What does it mean to be safe? Just having safety beyond the beams and columns, but then to also how you have to be then careful about this whole idea of what it means to live, the invisibility of the virus, and how the virus can permeate the walls and all that. And so there's this building that I stayed in for about 3 years, and what I tried to sort of like put out was to like flesh out instead of like so what I've sort of like fleshed out in terms of like digital design as a way of using design to create solutions. So oftentimes you have where as architects, as artists, we are expected to respond to a problem, and then we often create these really fascinating three-dimensional drawings, this that in a way doesn't solve the problem. But then at the same time, the problem is represented in a different form, and that it becomes sort of like much kind of like palatable for us to really be in the space. So digitally, using VR, using all kind of digital tools, what does it mean to really exist in that space? With all of the sound material, as against what does it mean to be there physically? And about being there physically is what took me to my next project, where the Ogoni Cleanup is a performance piece that I made in March of 2020. Ogoni land is in the Niger Delta area of Nigeria, which is the southern part of the country, and it's the oil region. And it's been since 1956, when crude oil was discovered in commercial quantities in Nigeria by Shell. There's been a lot of environmental pollution from the 80s, and it started getting much more renowned worldwide conversation in the 90s. And there's been a series of military conversation, there's been a series of militancy, activism around the conversation on the pollution in the Niger Delta. There's been a lot of photographic documentation, documentaries have been made. And in 2011, the United Nations Environmental Program did a report, and they were in collaboration with the Nigerian government, to clean up the Ogoni land. And the cleanup project was supposed to take 30 years and about $1 billion. And what I find very fascinating is how also solutions, especially when it comes to conversation around environment, climate, the solutions and the processes to solve these problems are always embroidered in political theatrics. So for me, what does it really mean to clean up an environment? You know, the same way, what does it mean to go on the streets to protest for change? At what point do we now understand the line that exists between what is performative and what is really legal in terms of solving the problem itself? So I decided to clean up the environment, and I'm going to show the video for the performance, which exists as a two-channel piece. It's about 3 minutes, 44 seconds. And so this takes me to the third space. So the Oshun-Oshogbo Sacred Grove, it's in Osun State, which is southwest Nigeria. It's 75 hectares forest, which is one of UNESCO's World Heritage Site. And the forest, in my research, I'm really working on this self-research called Evil Forest and Demonic Shores, Decolonizing Climate Change. And it's really a way for me to foreground spirituality in the conversation, in the engagement with nature, where on one hand we have the forest, and also you also have the sea as two visual spaces in which you can then look into all of the archives, all of the spiritual engagement with the space. In terms of the sacred grove, my focus really was the Oshun deity itself is the deity of fertility. So this festival that happens in the forest, people come. So people that want to have children, they come there, they worship the Oshun river, and they have priestesses and priests in the space. And also, I started to also then think about how when we speak about the climate, it's so very futuristic. And then also that, but then in reality, you think about the idea of nature, you think about the idea of being organic, being ethical, are actually things that were really in the past. So in a way that, life was very organic, we've been surrounded by nature. And then what does it mean in terms of a space where the forest, in my context, for example, contains so much spiritual provenance? Then how do you then begin to sort of like retrieve some of those lost data in terms of how people have spiritual connection with the forest? Then they tend to protect it. But then when you have a capitalistic relationship with nature, and then the idea of actually preserving something that's giving you profit, becomes much, much difficult as a concept to really, really grasp. And what happens in the process is you tend to like find ways of sort of like reinventing how you sort of like destroy the planet itself. Um, my work at the Grove sort of like exists as a 3-channel video where I filmed extensively the forest, I filmed also the river, and in the Sacred Grove, there are over 40 shrines there, and a lot of sculptures and artworks were commissioned and were made around the spaces. Where the museum itself, the forest is like a museum where the gods live. And when you sort of like take away all of the shrines, all of those spiritual entities from
Ifá ní ilá sogún, ilá ń lọ sóde rere, ìrókò sọ́gbọ̀n, ìrókò ń lọ sóde ìgbà búbu, oníyaya wọn ṣàádọ́ta, àwọn yẹn ń lọ sóde ìmọ̀wó, bòbó so, bòbó kò so, ẹ̀pà kò tọ̀ràn, dé á fún Ọ̀rúnmìlà, bàbá kọ́lé kalẹ̀ tán, bàbá ń kọmi ní ikú, wọ́n lè ṣe tìwọ Ọ̀rúnmìlà tó kọ́lé kalẹ̀ tán, tó wá ń kọmi ní ikú, ó ní tó.
So it's this idea of the forest and how the different voices of the priests and how you engage with nature, the incantations, sort of like a way for me to sort of like document, but then also get to understand nature not just from the physical or from the scientific, but also from the spiritual. So it's, thank you for this. And thank you very much, Oliver.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you so much, Ayo. This was absolutely incredible and also interesting to see how your architectural background influenced your practice. And that's also something that we'll hear now from the ReSpace project. The next speaker is Paula Callus. She is the Associate Professor at the National Center for Computer Animation at Bournemouth University, holds a PhD from SOAS, and her research expertise is in sub-Saharan African animation. Callus has worked as a consultant and educator on the UNESCO Africa Animated Project in Kenya and South Africa, and has been leading teams of artists to collaborate together on making animated shorts. Currently, she is also the co-I on CoAST, an HRC GCRF small grant, and PI on ArtOp, the visual articulations of politics in Nigeria, as well as the project lead on the ReSpace project. Over to you, Paula.
Okay, great. So as I mentioned earlier on, I would just give like a brief overview of the project and really the approach we had when myself, Linda, Stephanie all got together on one of the Changing the Story earlier projects. And we were having conversations around space and the significance of space and place. And this was connected to Linda's own project with the school museum. So as we mentioned earlier on, ReSpace is very much concerned with how history can be thought of and taught through an engagement with space and place and the concepts, if you like, that these bring about. And at the early stages when we were talking about this, we were thinking about engaging as well different fields and disciplines to be able to think about the representation of space through different lenses. And Linda, Anita and Steph were bringing their knowledge of anthropology, and myself, my own background in computer animation, but also anthropology of media. And we began to also think about potential partners in Rwanda, and we were very keen to connect with the University of Rwanda, in particular the architecture department. So this is, if you like, how these three streams come together. And as I mentioned earlier on, I think kind of the sentence that we have on our website homepage really embodies, if you like, how the project came to be. And we saw it in different ways. First of all, we saw a temporality. So we looked at obviously the past, present and future, and an engagement, if you like, with time. But also we thought about these different spaces and the resonances as well, historical resonances between Kosovo and Rwanda. And so what we set out to do with young people was engage with the past, experience the present and imagine the future. And we saw this sort of the act of imagining or reimagining, and that creative process is really important as well, to be able to connect to the past and to connect with these histories. So the image that you have up on screen was some early concepts that we were developing with some of the students at Bournemouth University to look at how we can conceptualize the project. And key to the project was as well, if you like, something which maybe became apparent later, but was a transdisciplinary approach that we had to research. And through our conversations from our earlier meetings with partners, it became apparent that really what we were trying to do was examine, if you like, this idea, but through different lenses, and to take methods that had been developed in different fields like architecture or within the arts or anthropology, and to consider how those methods allow us to understand history through sight, right, and sites of significance. And so retrospectively, I started looking at transdisciplinary research, and we came up with this image, which I really liked because I think it completely captures how this project unfolded, in that really it's quite a tangle, if you like, of different disciplines that came together and hopefully to integrate. And so by that I mean, like, we weren't traveling in parallel. What we tried to do was borrow from each other's methods and apply each other's methods within our own context. So when Anita and Linda in Kosovo were going on their site visits, they were trying out methods that were maybe a combination of ethnography as well as looking at sketching, or perhaps creating maps and other methods that came from our colleagues in Rwanda as well as our colleagues in the UK. So like I said, our starting point was always to look at space and to think of space. And what we did is we developed loads of different methods. We applied some of the methods, for example, specifically animation, because at Bournemouth, in my department, that's what we do best. But we also worked with other artistic and wider practices. So hopefully I'll just give you a quick kind of run through again of the website in a bit more detail, which will clearly kind of show our method and how we approach the project. So this is a little example of one of the very earlier workshops we did in Bournemouth, where we took an old postcard of Kosovo, and then we did a time-lapse stop motion where we drew and redrew this this place as it changed through time. So I go to my ReSpace reboot slide because of course COVID happened, and in fact that caused us to think and rethink the project in a variety of different ways. Initially we intended to all meet at least 3 times in the project in each of the respective countries. So we set out to first kick off the project in Bournemouth and then meet in Kosovo and then Rwanda, and then we were going to close or end the project back in Kosovo with an exhibition. And when COVID happened, we sort of had to reboot the whole project and reconsider our own approaches and how we would be able to share these methods remotely. We took the notion of the architectural survey as something that sort of underpinned how we would design the project going forward. And of course, when we look at a definition of survey, really what we're thinking about is looking at something closely or examining it, examining the features of a place so as to be able to construct a plan or a map or a description. And in fact, I think the results of our project are very much aligned with this idea of surveying. But what we wanted to do was to take the survey and really go beyond thinking about surveying a place from through an architectural lens, but also surveying a place through an anthropological lens, or surveying a place through an artistic lens. So applying methods from different fields that allowed us to survey the place. So how did we go about doing that? We worked together largely, actually, and I'm sure my colleagues later on will go into a bit more detail about this, led at times by young people, selecting sites of significance. So what we decided was we would pick 3 sites from each place as sites that we thought were significant from a historical perspective, and that in each of these sites we would try out these methods, we would try out these processes and come up with a series of exercises that eventually would become a resource that we would share with other people. We also use new technologies and immersive technologies. And we felt that given that we wouldn't be able any longer to physically visit these spaces, it became really important to share as much as possible the greatest amount of information about a place to give people the richest, if you like, understanding of that place. And so we used 2D drawing, we used 3D reconstructions, 3D videos, sketches, photography, maps, short films, soundscapes, collected sounds, so a whole range of audio visual material. And this all then became kind of collected and organized to be presented on our website. So what do we see the website doing? Hopefully we hope that the website will serve as a resource, and it's a resource that has namely like 3 purposes. It's a place you might go to if you wanted to learn specifically about these places of significance. It would be a place you would go to if you wanted to learn about methods. So we're presenting the idea of arts-based methods or architectural methods, anthropological methods, or transdisciplinary methods, and we're presenting them all in the same space. And we're also drawing out, hopefully, for the visitor of the site, we're drawing out connections between these disciplines. So we're making these connections more visible so that these fields are no longer isolated, but in fact, the connections are much more likely than one would think. And obviously, we wanted people then to look at and use the art-based material that was generated at the project as a means to activate a discussion. So some of these artifacts are already exhibited online, and you can view in the gallery. So I'll click onto that after I finish this and just give you a quick run through. But then there's other material that actually still hasn't been uploaded yet, which is work in progress and being finalized, where we're looking at creating interactive experiences. So using CGI and creating if you like, I don't want to call them games because they're not goal oriented. These are more about finding out about a place. And so this was done with my students collaborating with students in Rwanda. The previous year we had similar collaborations happening between the animation students and students in Kosovo, where they created like an interactive experience of a place. And so in this instance, what you're seeing is a concepting, if you like, for the experience, where you will be able to interact with objects that will then basically trigger either photographs or trigger sounds, so stories about the place, and also trigger video. So you'll be able to see 360 videos of that particular location. And in this instance, I think it's Ngisimba. So when you start the experience, you can see there are 3 locations, and it also goes through a year. So it takes you through a month by month, if you like, year, calendar year in the game, where you go through the rainy seasons and the dry seasons. And there are sounds that are actually recorded from the environment. So what we're looking at is the application of non-fiction in CGI, which for my students, of course, is very new. So the learning, I would say from like a Bournemouth University perspective, has been really great, because it's very unusual for our students to work with non-fictional material. And what we've also picked up on are methods actually that we've learned from our colleagues in Rwanda and in Kosovo from their own fields, so through anthropology and through architecture. So I don't know how much time we have left, but I'd like to just maybe show you the website. Oliver?
Yeah, no, definitely there's enough time for that.
Okay, super. Let's let me just exit this. Whoops. Okay, and I think now you should be able to see the website. So the website, for the website, we used these conceptual maps, if you like, to represent the project. On the top, you have Rwanda, on the bottom, you have Kosovo, in the middle, you have the methods. Initially, we were thinking about a kind of temporality as well, that goes from past, present, future. And we were thinking about it more because in Rwanda, our colleagues in Rwanda, the exercises they focused on were very much about a reimagining of space. And so their students selected sites and visited these sites, and they were tasked with repurposing or reimagining these buildings or these sites and what they could be. Whereas in Kosovo, our colleagues looked to the past, looked to working with archives, and viewing the past from the present. So a lot of the methods they used, you can see, included things like sensory ethnography, interviews, archival research, and video diaries. But of course, as I mentioned earlier, really these methods, as you hover over it, you can see this, these methods are applied across a range of different sites. So it's also true that some of the architectural methods, such as mapping, for example, were used by the students in visiting the sites in Kosovo. And likewise, for example, the artistic methods were used both in Rwanda and in Kosovo. So when you're navigating the site, you're able to look at these methods. So you can click on the methods to the site. Again, we've color coded it just to make it easier. And it'll scroll down. You have a sort of an overview as a resource of like what an anthropological method involves. And then you can look at the specific things, for example, that we did in each of these places. Also, you're able to access the actual site, so access information about the sites, again, by clicking on the map. And then inside here, you'll find information about the site and also things like the photos, sketches, the maps that were made, video diaries, soundscapes. So this was all the, if you like, exercises that we went through when we were visiting the sites. And in terms of resources for people going forward, we created file fact sheets, which then you can download, which are just a one-page PDF, which give you sort of bullet point information about these sites. And the idea is that you would use that as an educational resource. And that goes hand in hand with the toolkits, which we're still, this is a work in progress. We've only put 3 up so far, but we'll be uploading more in the weeks to come. So, for example, to illustrate what a toolkit might look like, we've created these kind of exercise sheets. I don't know if that loads up. There we go. Again, trying to keep it really simple. So just like a one-page exercise. It tells you what materials you require. So if you're an educator and you wanted to try this, and sort of gives you, if you like, an overview of the exercise and questions that you would ask your students. So for example, in this instance, it's about animating postcards. And the idea is to get students to think about how they engage with the past and the present through the process of erasing and drawing over images, right? And to think about permanence and change as it connects to space and place. So that's one example. You can see we've also got other examples here. So 13 Ways is an exercise that was developed by our colleagues in Rwanda, who took, actually, I think it's based on an architecture book called 13 Ways to Look at Architecture. And this scholar was looking at a poem, which was called 13 Ways of Looking at a Blackbird. And so in this exercise, what we were doing is we're encouraging students to think about creating portraiture of place, and this idea of being able to view something from multiple perspectives. And we do that using the poem, if you like, as a means to examine that and to encourage them to think about perspective through place. And so finally, I suppose I wanted to take you to, these are the artists who have worked with us. So like I said, it was transdisciplinary in the sense that we didn't only work with academics. It was really important for us actually to work with practitioners who brought their tacit knowledge and collaborated with the students, and without which actually none of this really would have been possible. They were a very important part of the process. And our students, still again, work in progress. The page is being populated. So we're missing photos and other biographical details. So I think this page is going to be much greater. But currently you can see some of the students who worked with us last year on the Hertica Home, which was a non-fiction interactive piece that was developed by Bournemouth University students and Erasmus students from Kosovo. And this year, Iris, Daniel, and Afsana, who have kindly worked and collaborated with Bournemouth University to create this interactive 3-site experience that is being developed, but also who have been working all throughout the project on the site visits. And finally, I think what I'd like to do is maybe end with just showing you the 2 or 3 of the pieces that were made. that relate to the different sites. And these were made with the artists collaborating with the students. I don't know, I mean, Susan might want to talk about hers in her talk. So I don't know if Susan, if you mind me showing it now, or do you want me to show Alfred's and you'll talk about it in your presentation?
I'm really happy for you to show it now, actually,
Okay.
Paula. Yeah, no,
okay,
that's
super.
fine. Mine was a collaboration with Drittero, so it was me and Drittero, and then there was Alfred's piece.
Okay, super. So I'll play them both.
Center is mainly a foundation that has been there for years, helping the people in Nyamirambo. It's a school, and it have been an orphanage before, but now it's a school and a trauma-informed center, but not really designed for that. So that's where the project comes in. I wanted to still have the feelings and give the feelings that we did for years, because it's like a safe haven for people in that community. Well, the project is about a school, La Columbia School, and it's located in the wetlands in Kigali. Well, with the rate that things are evolving at, I think it's going to relocate elsewhere, maybe in the next 5 years, but that's the whole point of this study. I know, how do we work on environmental conservation, but then how also does that environmental conservation affect heritage conservation?
It's a neighborhood, Mumiembe. It spans along the wetland and the formal settlement up here. So it is an informal settlement with simple buildings, which represent also the informal economy of the people living in that place. But the whole neighborhood is planned for the mixed use zone. I chose this site, first of all, because I wanted to connect it with the wetland, as the wetland want to be conserved, and also to try to imagine how the mixed use zone in this city can look like.
Okay, and I'll just play a second one.
Unfortunately, the sound isn't playing.
Yeah, Paula, we can't hear the sound.
Oh no.
Yeah,
Sorry.
we were able to hear it before.
Did you hear the sound before?
Yeah, before it was loud and clear.
Okay, let's try that again. I'm just gonna see. Did you hear that?
Working. Yeah, perfect.
Yeah. Apologies, everyone. Let's try that again. Right. So hopefully when you have time, you'll be able to go through all of our gallery and watch the range of different creative material actually that was made by the young people with the artists in collaboration and together. And our objective, I think, is that this work will become a resource in itself, and that it will be used by educators to think about space and history and to engage young people in doing that. So it's also, it's not just a question of, if you like, trying out the methods and the toolkits, but also using the creative material that's been produced as a means to engage with young people. I think I'll end it here. I did have a final slide, but I felt that this was a good place to stop.
Entirely up to you. If you, yeah.
Oh yeah, no, my final slide was more academic. It was about transdisciplinary methods. So
well, maybe we can come back to this because we will be talking about different methods a bit further down then. I was wondering, does everybody feel like having a quick break, or should we, yeah, maybe a 5-minute comfort break, and then we can come back to our next speakers, Marie-Amélie Ntugeba and Assumpta Mugiraneza.
Yeah,
so
great.
We can reconvene at 4:15 in that case, yeah?
Super.
Is everybody back, or should we give it a couple more minutes? I think we're running a bit against time, so maybe we should get started. Does that work?
Yeah, I think so.
Amelie, are you here with us?
Yes.
Fantastic. Okay, let me introduce you briefly. Our next two speakers are Marie-Amélie Ntikolieva and Assumpta Mugiraneza. Amélie holds a bachelor degree in architecture from the University of Rwanda and an MSc in global urban development and planning with merit obtained at the University of Manchester, where she focused on cities of the global south. Amélie was an associate at Mass Design Group, where she worked on several design projects, including hospital and university master plans as a construction administrator. Amélie also worked on research projects, including the assessment of classrooms and their impact on learning outcomes for primary school children. And she worked as an intern on UN Habitat, where she mainly worked on the preparation of the background paper on the third National Urban Forum and on the Urban Low Emission Strategies project. Currently, Amélie is working as an assistant lecturer at the University of Rwanda, the School of Architecture and Built Environment. And Amélie will be joined by Assumpta Mugiraneza. Assumpta Mugiraneza is a Rwandan political intellectual, founder and director of the Iriba Centrum for Multimedia Heritage, an audiovisual archive center for speech and dialogue, and the process of reappropriation of the past. The Iriba Center is free and accessible for everyone and operates between science and practice. It offers support for psychosocial, educational, and artistic programs to rebuild relationships between generations and to give young people a voice. Thank you so much for joining us today, Assumpta and Amélie. Amélie, you're here, yeah.
Yes. Okay. Let me share my screen.
Fantastic. We can see this.
Thank you, everyone. I'm going to talk about the ReSpace project on the Rwandan side and how that could have a potential impact on how we teach the history of architecture, especially in Rwanda, and how that could help in the study of the analysis or the study of our past, then our present, and then the future of Rwanda, how to reimagine the future of Rwanda. But before we start, we started by asking ourselves a question: what is architecture? Architecture is often defined as the art and the technique of designing and building. But as we know, architecture is more than that. It's also defined as being a multidisciplinary field of study that draws on the arts, sciences, and the social sciences. And as Peter Zumthor put it, we must construct a radical system of approach that enables us to see the work of architecture as a focal point from different angles simultaneously, that being historically, aesthetically, functionally, personally, and passionately. And if you look at these 5 words, you see that architecture is not merely about studying the building. It goes into the history of that building, or history of that space, to be able to understand what architecture really is. So with the collaboration of anthropologists and artists through the ReSpace project, it was clear that there is no single way of doing an architectural analysis of a place or space. And through that interdisciplinary approach, architecture students, together with animation students from ADMA. They were immersed to explore the past, the present, and the future of 3 sites. But they were not only studying the sites, but also the people. And that was done through a series of mapping, drawing, reading, writing, reflecting on the activities that they were doing or on the spaces that they were visiting. And it was also through audio and visual activities. And you can see that here it was through sketches, and this was one of the methods that was used in La Colombia School, was being reimagined through sketches, like putting layers of papers on top of the existing map or the existing structure to be able to reimagine that through sketches. It was also through animation, and that was done, this image is from a video reanimating what Munyembe could potentially be. Munyembe is an informal settlement, and how that could be in the future, how to reimagine that area so that its history, its past, and its present is not reflected in the future, but is also thought about as one of the driving component of the decisions that as architect could take to transform or to reimagine that space. So the introduction and the use of anthropological methods like videos and interviews, and artistic methods like animation, sound, and image making in the analysis of these 3 sites has brought new perspectives on how the history of a place is interpreted architecturally. If we look at the animation and image making, has shown that it could help in solidifying or immortalize specific moments in the history of a place. And that is a really key point for architects when designing a space or when trying to recreate a specific moment in time. The voice recording and the video diaries could potentially help in making a moment in time eternal. So we took, when visiting the sites, we took series of video diaries, but then when we look at them, it's like we're back in that particular moment in time where we were on site. And that is very key, especially for a person like me who is teaching the history of architecture. Taking these methods and applying them, these are key at learning the history of architecture, because it helps in recognizing the past of a certain area, but also living in the past as if you were there, because video diaries have been produced in that area, or if it's a building which is being studied. V-Ray and 360 videos, again, also could help in reanimating a period of time from the past, taking images and reimagining what that area was, and then you reimagine it and you animate it through V-Ray, and that also could be a big help in the study of the history of architecture. So the architecture education, especially the teaching and learning of history of architecture, is, as I was saying, is one element that could potentially benefit from this interdisciplinary approach.
Emily, we can't hear you currently. Hello, Amelie, are you still here? Hello. Yeah, I'm not sure if this is a network issue. I think maybe we should move on to Susan and Alfred for now until Amelie reconnects. What does everybody else think?
Yeah, probably.
Oh, fantastic. Okay, great.
Sorry, it was a small technical problem. So as I was saying, there are numerous questions that emerge, and one of those questions is, how can these interdisciplinary methods help in responding to the architecture needs of Rwanda that need to reconcile with its past in order to aspire for a better future? And this question is asked in a way that in Rwanda, a lot has happened, and there is a lot of history which has been, I don't know how to say it, is decimated, like it's non-existent, how these methods could help in learning that history, because there are buildings which were taken down. How can we use these methods to reconcile our past to our future? So that takes us to look at the history of Rwanda, especially in terms of architecture. What's the past, what's the present, and what is the future, and how has that been the study of this past, present, future, how the projects that the students were working on are trying to respond to these questions that we are asking ourselves. Again, we will start with a quote from Peter Zumthor, and he goes by, since our feelings and understanding are rooted in the past, our sensuous connections with the building must respect the process of remembering. And again, he thinks as an architect, we have our feelings and understanding which are rooted in the past. And then he says that our architectural connections, they start from our memories, things that we remember from our childhood, or things, I mean, our memories hold a lot of information in terms of architecture and how to go back to tap into those memories to be able to inform the future that we are trying to create or to reimagine. This is a schematic drawing of the traditional royal capital of Rwanda. And when the first explorers came to Rwanda, this was what architecture in Rwanda looked like. Round with thatched huts, and the hierarchy between spaces was very defined, from very public to very intimate as you move towards the center of the royal capital, and where the main hut was really located. But then when the Rwanda was confronted to the Western world, there was another type of architecture that emerged, a more rectangular architecture as opposed to the round one that the Rwandan architecture that people from that period of time knew. And then the architecture of Rwanda has changed drastically from that time. And then from the master plan, you see that everything is arranged. And so much has happened from the clearing of this type of thatched building to impose the use of a rectangular building, which was seen as a more, if you had a rectangular house, you are civilized, how do I say that? And then you're better in a way. And then when you live in a thatched house, it's more like you kind of still poor, and there is no advancement. So that was like detaching ourselves to the vernacular architecture that we knew. And then how, and that is like the type of a brief history of what happened to the history of the Rwandan architecture. And then how can we use these methods to reimagine the future of the Rwandan architecture? So taking as example the three projects that the students worked on. Students were given the task to analyze specific sites of memories to learn their past, to understand their present, and to reimagine their future. 3 sites were chosen: Isimba Memorial Center, which is located here. And then we have Ecole La Colombia, which is down here in the valley. And then we have Mumiembe, informal settlements. And then through a series of exercises based on the architecture, anthropological, and artistic methods, students revisited the past of these respective sites, and they contemplated the present through mapping, sketching, video diaries, and working. So they revisited the past through interviews, and I'm sure they've done research before to understand the past of those spaces. So it was through archive research. They contemplated their present through mapping, sketching, video diaries, and working. And then they finally reimagined the future of this space through the use of V-Ray and animation, and then drawings, to see like how can this space be reimagined based on the history, based on the population that lived there, and based on the different testimonies that they got from people living in those areas. So this is Mumiembe, and it was more of reimagining this social, because it's a big area, and then it's in an area that has, was created organically, but how to reimagine this social sustainability, and then to conserve the environment of a community. And then because this area is located near the wetland, and people living near the wetland, they have to relocate, but how to conserve the wetland, but again, to create a sustainability, and then to reinforce the resilience of people living in this area. And this was a proposal from a student. And then like for different sites, and again, for the Gisimba Memorial, how to reimagine this type of architecture, and then like taking care of the fragility of the history, the stories or the histories of the past of this area, to create a more, how do I say that? A more, a place which is not, I wouldn't say rooted in the past, but yes, rooted in the past, learning from it, creating a pleasant future, but also a promising, sorry, a pleasant present, and then a promising future for people using this neighborhood. And again, for the La Colombière School, is because La Colombière School is entirely in the wetland, and the question is a school which has to relocate, how to learn from that, and then to understand the dynamics of the wetland and the dynamics of a school, so that if it happens that it relocates, how to learn from what is already existing, and to inform the future sites which is going to be chosen, or how if it stays, how to reconcile those two elements, the wetland and the school. So after those exercises that the student went through, and then like after looking at the history of Rwanda, how architecturally things have been changing, there are questions that are needed for reflection. How can these interdisciplinary methods help in the definition of the Rwandan architecture identity? Because if we look at them, digging into the past, probably we're looking for an identity, but how can these methods help the Rwandan architecture to get that identity? And how can we make sure that this Rwandan architecture identity is still present in the contemporary, in the future architecture of Rwanda. The second question is, our way of thinking as architects is often influenced by what the world of technology and globalization is offering us. How can we use these methods to disseminate what we can learn from our past and carry it forward in what is suitable for our future? How can we recover parts or memories from the past and make them available for future generations using these same interdisciplinary methods? Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Emily. This was fantastic.
You're welcome.
Yeah, so our next two speakers are Susan Sloan and Alfred Muchilwe. Susan Sloan is an artist and lecturer based at the National Center for Computer Animation, Bournemouth University. She works both collaboratively and individually using 3D animation, mocap, digital sculpting techniques, and in order to create artworks and public projects. She has recently been working in collaboration with Universidad de las Americas, Quito, and the Quijos Nation in Ecuador within a multidisciplinary team to produce short films. Her individual work has been shown nationally and internationally at exhibitions including SIGGRAPH, Yokohama Art Museum, Glasgow International Festival, Annecy Animation Festival, ICEA, and the Photographers Gallery London, and many others. Susan is joined by the artist and animator Alfred Muchilwe. Alfred is an artist and animator who studied design at the University of Nairobi before being introduced to the world of animation, namely through his work on Tinga Tinga Tales, East Africa's first locally produced animation series for a global audience, where he worked as a lead animator. As part of the Africa Digital Media Academy, he oversees the foundation of the computer graphics program, as well as 2D cutted 2D animation training. And Alfred was one of the lead artists together with Susan at the ReSpace program. So it's my honor and pleasure to hand over to you, Susan and Alfred.
Hello. I'm actually just going to put in a little link to my Flickr site that explains a bit more about my work. So Alfred and I are going to share this presentation and we're going to kind of bat it about a bit. So I thought what I would do is I would start and say that, you know, myself, Alfred, and another artist, Dritero, who's a sound artist, were the lead artists on this project. And what Alfred and I thought we would do, Dritero isn't here today, was to go through with you our process of working with the students and setting exercises. That work can be evidenced through the website. The website's really has pretty much all of that work there. So Alfred and I are going to speak to you directly today. And I'm going to hand over to Alfred now, who's going to talk a bit about his role in the project, and then I'll talk about my role. Over to you, Alfred.
Thanks, Susan, and thanks, Oliver, for the introduction. Well, with regards to this project, the Africa Digital Media Academy is a vocational training institution based in Kigali. And we were called upon by Bournemouth University and the National University in Rwanda to support this project in a technical capacity. So what we did was we helped in gathering the data that was used by the students in the UK and in Rwanda. And also we have our animation students who created several pieces for this project. So these pieces were split into two. We used VR technology, and Susan was working with the students with regards to that. And what I was doing was working with the students to create stop motion animated films or stop frame animated films. And with these stop frame animated films, you can categorize them further into drawn stop motion. So there's one piece in the gallery about La Colombière that uses drawn stop motion, where we used an acrylic sheet and imposed it over an actual scene at La Colombière, and then made it look like a building is being erased. And then we used stop motion using materials. So we have another piece that talks about Mumiembe and the transformation that it's going through using, we did two versions. There's one where we used the actual bricks on the site, and then we did one with wooden blocks. And then finally, we did one piece using an animation technique called pixelation. This is where you use human beings to create the illusion of motion. So we did one piece about people from the community of the Miembe participating in recreational activities, namely a football game. So yeah, back to you, Susan.
Okay, so my background is in fine art sculpture, and I did an MPhil in 3D animation. And since then, my work has really been kind of a mixture of all of those things. So it can often be drawing, sculpture, animation, with technology all at the same time. And what I was really interested in doing with this project was using some technology where the students could feel immersed in the work that they were making. All of the information that they had been working with, which was anthropological and architectural, was so rich with information. Our role really as artists was to try and pull all of this work together, and the students' ideas and the research that they'd done to help them kind of reimagine these spaces, to help them make conceptual leaps, if you like. And I really wanted to work with them in a very immersive way. So the exercises that were set for the students were kind of, for me, from the if you like, the artistic discipline, were based on artworks that I'm very influenced by, and artists that I'm influenced by. One of them is Lee Freelander, who's a photographer, an American photographer, who places himself in the photographs that he takes of social scenes. And he does it through creating shadows of himself in the scene. And he does it through catching himself in reflections off of surfaces. And what that does is it kind of places the artist in the space at the same time as creating a social landscape. And I was really keen that the students saw themselves within the spaces. And I was really keen that they used techniques and exercises that were accessible to them. So things like camera phones, phone cameras, drawing materials. So the drawing exercises equally were to really encourage the students to have a dialogue with that environment and with that site. When you're drawing, you're very conscious of time, and you're very, very focused on that activity. So it's really important to create that dialogue with the space if you're going to understand the space properly. It's something that I would do as an artist. I do site-specific work, and I also, if you like, survey the site and think about it in those terms. What is my relationship with that site at that moment in time, and how can I take that away with me? Something that Io said earlier was that the kind of physicality of being in a space, and that became really important as well. So the workshops that I did with the students, really, my aim was to encourage them to feel always immersed in that space. All of the information that they had was rich. There was so much detail in there that I wanted them to really fully immerse themselves in whatever they were creating. So the VR technology that I used was called Quill, and it was a gesture drawing technique where you can create drawings in space, and you can move those drawings around, and you can sit inside the drawings, and you can animate the drawings. And the results are short films on the gallery section. So the students were able to create these short films that were, if you like, a kind of synthesis of these stories, of the history that they've been learning, of all of the mapping exercises they've been doing using the architectural methods, and the interviewing that they've been doing with the anthropology methods. So that was my intention with using the VR with the students. It was so that they could feel totally immersed in a new world that they had created. And it was really interesting working with them, because as soon as you put on a VR headset, you are in a different world. You're in a completely different world, and it gives you possibilities. So the possibilities become apparent when you're in that world. So, you know, that was the reasoning, if you like, behind using Quill VR software. Something else I wanted to talk about was the collaboration between myself, Dritter, and Alfred. So that became really important, because we had to know that we were talking about the same information. And so what we would do, and this was really difficult because we were all actually supposed to be in the spaces and we weren't able to be. So Alfred was able to be in Rwanda, Dritro was able to be in Kosovo, and I wasn't able to be in either of those spaces, but we were never really in the same space at the same time. So we had Zoom meetings where we would listen to the recordings that had been taken, and we would look at little snippets of work that we'd made, and we would share those, and we would talk about them, and then we would go and work with the students with these ideas in mind. And quite early on, we were very, very keen that sound would drive these pieces, that we would use these sound recordings or soundscapes to kind of open up the spaces for each other that we couldn't go to. So those were really beautiful meetings, actually, where we would sit and listen to the wetlands for a while, or we would listen to the schoolhouse, and we would listen to the kind of materiality and the kind of very rich ideas and stories that came out of that sound. Those seemed to kind of conjure up images in a way, actually, that some of the visual material couldn't. So that was the way that we worked together. And then Dritro composed some of these sounds together. Alfred and I made pieces from them and also collaborated with the students to work with those sounds. Okay, Alfred, over to you on interdisciplinary working.
Yeah, so another aspect to this project was collaborating with the students from the National University of Rwanda. And that's how I got involved, was in surveying the sites and collecting data. And we did this with photographs, we did 360 videos, we did audio as well. And then we also did 3D LiDAR scans using an iPad Pro. And beyond that, it was fascinating using the same set of data twice, because we handed it over to the students in the UK and they created some material using it. And we used it with our animation students and the architecture students as well. So with regards to the collaboration between the architecture students and the animation students, it was fascinating seeing how the architecture students would learn from how the animation students would use the audio to drive the animation, for example. And it's important to us, it was important to us that the whole creation process was student driven. So like they came up with the ideas, they sat down and they had meetings. They listened just the same way that Dritro, Susan, and I listened to the audio recordings. The students listened to the audio recordings and started building up concepts from those audio recordings. And the architecture students got involved, and not just with some of the quill stuff, but also with this, especially with the stop motion animation. And they got to witness how stop motion shots are created, and also participate. There's a participatory element as well, because there was one shot that was done in Mumiambe where they're playing a soccer match, where a group of the architecture students were like literally stars and also making the film at the same time. So that was really fascinating to see these synergies. In addition, they also helped out with audio recording, with voiceovers for some of the short films. So there's one that was done at La Colombia where Iris provided the voiceover because it's her project particularly. So she wrote a quick script and then recorded the voiceover, and our students managed to complete the shot. So I think there was a lot that was learned by both groups of students. And we are currently having conversations with Alex at the National University of Rwanda to see how we can take this collaborative spirit forward. And additionally, like, I think I'm thankful to Susan because she came in and she trained our students on how to use the quill, and she did several recordings that she shared with them that helped them out at some points where they might have gotten stuck. Yeah, so.
It was really fascinating.
Yes.
Fascinating. Yeah, I just wanted to kind of say a little bit more as well about, you know, not all of this work is finished. There is still work ongoing with the students from Kosovo and the students who specifically were involved with the Dodona Theatre piece, who were super excited to be creating their reimagining of that space and the importance of the Dodona Theatre as a place of resistance. And through using Quill and the VR headset, they were able to really generate ideas that they may not have been otherwise able to do. So that's still a work that's ongoing. And I'm kind of looking forward to seeing what the students have come up with and reconnecting with them again so that we can discuss that piece of work and move that forward and complete it. But I want to say how fantastic it was collaborating with Alfred. It was absolutely brilliant, and Dritro, and so that you know really was fantastic to have great people to collaborate with, and the whole team were really fantastic. It's a great project to work on, really wonderful. Alfred, did you want to say anything else, or have you?
I think you summed it up pretty well. But yeah, I'm also thankful and I'm glad that we got to collaborate on this project together.
Amazing.
Thank you so much, both. And I'm sure there's going to be a lot of questions from the audience. Now is the time where we're almost at the end, but it would be good to maybe get all the speakers back on camera to chip in and to contribute to a couple of questions. Do we have any particular questions from the audience? If you do have any, please post them in the chat or feel free to unmute yourself and just ask right away. I have tons of questions for you. I think for me, what you just highlighted, Susan and Alfred, is really this collaborative aspect of the project and how fascinating and exciting it was to work across boundaries and across countries, really, sometimes without being able to see the sites. Yeah, and I was wondering if maybe you could tell us a little bit, and Amelie as well, about, and Paula, of course, about the process of working remotely with one another and the practicalities of it. Who would like to respond? I know it's a bit of a...
I'll start, like, the thing with collaboration across countries is you're at the mercy of the internet. So you're only as good as your bandwidth. I think I can let someone else pick up from there.
Yeah, true.
No, that's true. But at the same time, Alfred, I think one thing as well, which we forgot to mention when we were going through all the methods and exercises and all that, was how we used Instagram and Insta Live, which I think really was a really small thing, but it had a great impact on everybody that was involved in those sessions, in that you really felt for a brief moment that you were present, in the sense that you're able to affect actually where you're looking or what you're looking at, and having a conversation with people who are there in real time whilst they're there, which I think, well, for me, was really important.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, I found the Insta Live sessions really opened up those spaces. And really, I felt like I was there. You know, I felt I was on the walk with all of you, and I think that was a bit of a game changer. I think for the project.
I was also excited about what you said, Susan, about this idea of exchange of methodologies and agreeing on a shared vocabulary and aligning a little bit on the different underlying theoretical frameworks. And yeah, I thought that was absolutely fascinating. And it was probably equally challenging in these kind of conditions now where you're working remotely. Yeah. Can you do you want to talk a little bit about the challenges, what you've learned from the project, also what you might be able to pass on to somebody who would embark on a similarly complex research and practice project? It's a question for, yeah.
Is that for anybody?
Yeah.
I mean, I would say, you know, kind of similar to Alfred, really, the challenges of teaching over Zoom actually are really hard. You know, I mean, we find them anyway at the university, but obviously, you know, I don't know, maybe with a greater distance, it's problematic. There were issues with that. Maybe I would think about finding, I don't know, another way of sharing our files. We shared them quite well, I think, Alfred, and we were able to pick them up. I know Paula, you worked with your students across the board really well.
Yeah, we had, we used,
yeah.
I mean, I think it's going back to what Alfred says, so you need good bandwidth. And even that's the thing with like technology. One thing as well that we try to factor in, I don't think we've necessarily done it successfully, but it is something that we'll be thinking about again going forward, is just the different technological landscapes that people exist in. And so, for example, just sending very large files or sharing very large files, you know, one of the reasons why we, for example, went with YouTube was that YouTube will go up or down depending on people's bandwidth. And that was really important because, of course, it meant that more people had access to the content rather than just us putting up these very large files that nobody could watch or interact with. So it's something that I think I'd like to think more about, like how we can, especially when you're forced to work using a digital platform and collaborate digitally and disseminate digitally, then you really need to start engaging with like what the global technological landscapes are like, and understand like how to best present that information. It went slightly off topic, Oliver.
Well, for me, what I learned was the value of research. It's something that I keep on trying to pass on to my students, because I think as animators, you spend way too much time in front of the computer and not enough time in the real world. So when I see stuff that someone like Ayo is doing, we appreciate that, you know, because it's like you're actually in the real world and using your artistic skill set to effect change. So I hope that for the students, like this is sort of the beginning of like getting them involved in real world projects. The second thing is getting out of your comfort zone. So I think prior to this, maybe 1 or 2 students had access to a VR headset, but none of them had used Quill. So it was interesting to see them tackling this new technology and also tackling this new software and actually coming up with a tangible product at the end of it.
Maybe I can just say, I came very late to the project, and for me it was exciting to also see how much we learned from each other, but also how much the students were part of this discussion and were involved in the process. And Amelie specifically, who just left, was so fantastic, and always weaving them in and assuring that we would also learn from them. So specifically architectural methods, for instance. And yeah, I mean, the fact that we're all coming from these very, very different contexts, I felt sometimes the students were very quick in being able to adapt to these different frameworks. Yeah.
We had lots of sort of satellite things that were happening, so like as unintended consequences. So the interactive experiences, that was something that wasn't planned from the start but happened as a consequence. And for example, Ayo was involved with Stephanie and her students, where she was also sort of taking on ideas that are connected to the project, and then running again like small satellite projects that will exist on our blog. I don't know if Stephanie's here, if she wants to talk about it a bit, but I know that her students engaged very much with the presentations that the artists were giving.
Yes, Steph's here actually.
I think she was, but maybe
you muted, Steph.
Here we go. yeah, I didn't feel it was like satellite. It was like doing something in parallel, wasn't it? And actually developing the anthropological methodologies. And what we didn't mention is that Nita and I generated this huge Erasmus project, which ran alongside, which allowed us in the first year to get a lot of students from Kosovo to Bournemouth who worked with Paula. And then the next year, this year, they were in my class and worked through space as anthropologists in a class called Understanding Culture. And I mentioned that in an earlier panel. What we did is there was a particular concept to think through, which now is in our anthropological methods as well, which is this idea, an epistemological idea to thinking through space and place, which we called we didn't call it, it's out there, we utilized it. It's making the familiar strange, the strange familiar. So you think about things that are normalized or taken for granted, and think about them as if you're looking at them as if they were from Mars, right? But at the same time, things you take for granted in your own environment, you alienate yourself from them, and then things you are totally familiar with and take for granted. God, I'm totally getting confused. It's been a long day.
You know,
making them familiar, strange, familiar. So it goes both ways. You denormalize the normalized, and you basically familiarize yourself with the stuff that is otherwise seems strange, and you realize how from within it is just normal within its context, right? So it's an intellectual, philosophical, epistemological process, and it's so much part of the arts, right? The function of arts to pull the rug underneath things that people take for granted. And it's also part of anthropology because it makes you think through things, which otherwise would be labeled exotic or so, but equally, you recognize what you take for granted. And it is so mobilizing to think through. So they had this concept of thinking through the experience of culture change during the pandemic. And, so that was, and they had to come up with arts products. And that's where Ayo came in, and Paula came in, and Susan came into our class, which was so wonderful, Oliver as well, and some other people. And they worked in one workshop with my students who are criminologists, sociologists, and anthropologists. And they had to, they did some wonderful artworks, and we'll have one or the other in a separate block. So, one thing after the other. But it just shows you how these disciplines come together and how this thinking goes on, and it goes into all sorts of different niches and arenas and realms across what we do. And then it feeds back as well, right? So obviously Nita, Linda, and I worked on the anthropology methods particularly. And this is just one very generic thing. But then I see that again in what Amélie did, right? Or who did this poem that you introduced earlier today, Paula, the one on the tree?
That's right. So the 13 ways to look at a blackbird, which then there's
exactly that, sort of to in your mind get away from thinking a tree is just a tree, and that it's just like making the tree, the object, sort of different, estranged. So making the familiar strange in this case. Yeah, anyway, so yes, it has these big repercussions, and it interlinks with so many projects and so many activities that we do. But what's the best of all this project and all the projects? It's just meeting everybody and seeing what everybody is doing and getting to know you guys. And my God, knowing Alfred and Alex and Amélie now, I mean, that is just fantastic. And everybody, So obviously, I've always worked with my friends in Pristina. So there's wonderful colleagues and acquaintances, but I never had this connection to Rwanda, and I really cherish that. I mean, and now Nigeria as well. I think that's quite phenomenal. This is so wonderful of changing the story that we have these global contacts, and God knows there's so many opportunities forward looking, isn't there?
Mm.
I think Oliver, Paul and Alex have their hands up as well.
Exactly. We've got questions from the audience. Yeah, who wants to go first? Paul, you're already on camera. Maybe you want to go first? You're muted.
Just first thing to say, what a brilliant idea it was funding you guys. It's such a brilliant project, and you've done so much with it, and it's just wonderful to hear. And
Paul, you need to introduce yourself though, because people don't know that.
Oh right, okay. Hello, I'm Paul Cook. I'm the principal investigator of Change the Story, and it was all my idea to fund them. It wasn't really. It was lots of people's ideas because everybody thought it was a brilliant project, and we were right. So that's nice to see. But the thing that I'd just like to ask you is, the project's called ReSpace. It's about kind of looking at space in different ways, using different techniques to look at space. You then had to ReSpace, as you said, reboot it through the pandemic. And you've talked a lot about the process, and you've talked a lot about the various different things that you had to do. I'm just really intrigued. How did it, if you had to name one way in which the project forced you to think differently about space? So I guess I'm thinking about results as opposed to the process. What's the one takeaway that you would have from the project in terms of, I didn't think about my work in that way until I did this? You can all stare at your shoes now until somebody actually tries to answer the question. But I know it's a really mean question, but I'd really be interested in, there's been the process really forced you, and I know that you did this really, really systematically, to rethink not only what you were doing, but how you were doing it because of the pandemic, because of cuts and all the rest of it. And then you did all the stuff that you did. What would you say the one key thing, one takeaway is kind of like, ReSpace has allowed me to rethink space, and this is what has occurred to me because of this project?
Well, for me, it's allowed me to rethink space from a distance. And I think I spoke about that in the About section on the website. At the beginning, there was a first version of that paragraph. And it was a bit Debbie Downer because I was talking about this idea of it was taken from a scholar who writes about site-specific work and how actually with, everybody traveling, there's no such thing as site specificity because people can move around and it's all fluid and this is all great. And obviously he was writing before like a pre-pandemic time. And then in their writing, they mentioned this idea of the phantom of a place. So even though you don't need to think about site specificity, in fact, there's always this phantom of a place that people want to kind of connect to. And I felt like at the time, my first version was like, but we're sort of like tormented by the fact that we still have not got to visit these places, which is where the project, how the project began. And in conversation, sometimes you would pick up from the team that there was a bit of a longing to be there, a longing to go to these places. And I think it's definitely made me think about experiencing place in a different way, because we were forced to think about it in a different way. And that's just a consequence of just, having to work remotely and then think about experiencing place from a distance. Like, how do you do that? Yeah.
And learning from each other too, isn't it? Because I remember Nita, for instance, was presenting a sensory ethnography, and that concept then helped us, I guess, to reflect on these remote experiences, mediated experiences differently, to understand how people are sensing a place or feeling it. Yeah, there's so much to learn from each other. Anybody else wants to respond to this question?
I think I'm going to have to think about it. I think it's a great question. It's a really good question, because it definitely has. It's changed something. It's really, I don't know quite how.
I think
if you want to write a blog about it and put it on the Changing the Story website, please feel free. Sorry, Paula.
I was going to say, I think educationally, like if our students were in the room, I mean, they might have something to say about how they've understand space, given that especially the animation students tend to work very much in fictional worlds. They write fictional stories and they create worlds through their storytelling, and they always, for the most part anyway, tend to conceive of these, imagined places, and so their stories are in imagined places. And through this project, they're having to think about, real place, and what does that mean, and how can you use it in different ways in animation. So this kind of dealing with non-fiction, I think, has got them to yeah, to think of space in a different way, and not to be limited by, you know, their cliche animation, like, oh, I'm gonna tell a cute story, kind of, you know, they're kind of moving beyond that. I don't know, Alfred, if your students done
yeah, but to add on to that, it's not just going out into the real world, but also in terms of design, because normally when they're doing the design process, they're doing it two-dimensionally, maybe on paper or maybe on their computers, but it's two-dimensional. But this time they were taking an immersive approach when they were using Quill. Yeah, so I think that's the one thing that's changed for them. Of course, there's a whole lot that I'm sure I'll remember once this conversation is over, but that's the one thing that sticks out for me.
We have a question by Alex, who obviously is also a really important contributor to the project. Hi, Alex.
Yes, hi, thank you very much. I think I'll just pick up from Paul's question. I think it's a very good question, and reflecting upon that question, there are two very key outcomes for us. The first one is how people learn, how young people learn is very crucial. Now, the number of tools you expose them to, and then the mixed methods that we had showed how passionate our group of students kept growing on the project. So tapping into how people learn is one key takeaway in the tools we use, and then the methods. Then the second key takeaway is how young people make or create. You know what Alfred was saying, to design. So in architecture, I think Ayo will probably agree with me, is you either draw or model something. Two things, the primary, you draw or you model something. But in this case, you're drawing and modeling something using several different tools. So we are doing exactly the same two things, but we're using different tools and expressing them using different media. And I think that is a very enriching addition to the teaching, learning, and making process. Now, I have a question. I think that this project has benefited from limits. You know, the limits we had to work with, I think have added to the outcomes and the value of the outcomes to the project. I'm just curious, if we had ReSpace Reboot 2 or ReSpace 2, and there was no COVID, what are some of the limits we would think about to achieve even better outcomes? It's something I'm thinking about, because I'm very keen on building on what Alfred and the rest of the team have been able to achieve, you know, in Rwanda. But I'm curious about the limits we need to set for ourselves to nurture this creativity even further. And thank you very much.
So Alex, who's going to answer that question though?
Let me jump in. I would say, like, try and restrict the area that you're covering, because I think we were working with 3 sites and we sort of like spread ourselves like over those 3 sites. So I'd say if I was doing it again, I would try and limit it to maybe one site.
Yeah, I agree, actually, I think that's a valid point. But then also, I mean, if you wanted to, I don't know if I would like to see it in terms of limitations, but I think more of like opportunities and going forward, like definitely some of the themes that have emerged, maybe more from Rwanda than in Kosovo, was an engagement with site and the environment, and environmental issues being very much connected to reimagining on the future. And I know, like, that's why, you know, when Ayo was talking about his work and, you know, like the impact of pollution, for example, on a site, I think it's very present in young people's minds, and it's present in like our students and in your students. And that's something where I think, given more time, I would have liked to explore that a bit more with the young people, and to think about site, but under that lens. So like, you know, the Anthropocene and our impact on the environment as place. Yeah. my own thing right now, that I'm getting excited about is solastalgia, which is the change, the nostalgic feeling that people have when an environment is changing very rapidly as a result of development. And that's something which I've been looking at. And I know it's kind of, sometimes it appears like it's appeared in this project. And I've also like come across it in other projects, working with artists that are trying to capture that, you know, how their space and place is changing very rapidly as a result of like urban development, for example, and the impact that that's having on communities that live there, and how they feel about that space. Yeah, so that's something I would like to take forward.
For me, I wouldn't change much because I thought it was a really enriching experience for everybody. But the one thing that I would maybe want to see is an exhibition, an actual physical exhibition. That would be fantastic. And obviously to be in the same space with everybody, that would be great.
Yeah, so Paul, if there's any Changing the Story follow-up dissemination events, we'd like a nice big exhibition. If
yeah, well, watch this space. So we haven't, because basically all the money's been cut and we've been trying to scrabble around for funding all over the place. We've basically been kind of trying to get whatever money we can to get together to get a final event going. So watch this space. But it would be great to have you guys certainly involved in that. And yeah, so you never know. At this point, it's not looking amazing, but don't worry, you'll be the first on our list to talk to.
Super. Okay.
Right. Well, on this note, yeah, maybe this is, if there are any more questions from the audience, but well, yeah.
I just wondered whether our Kosovo friends are still there, because they're so crucial part to this, but not on. It's so difficult because they're in situ in. Oh, hey, there they are. Oh, 2 empty seats. So I don't know. Maybe they have left. I don't know. Hey guys, where are you? There. Hey. They must be knackered.
Hiding.
It's gonna be here for now, but yeah, no, it was just great to get a chance to hear other people talk. And hi. See you. Obviously, it would have been much better if you had all been here, or many of you would have been here, but I guess we pulled it off as well. I think maybe just to add in terms of Paul's question, I mean, I think Alex had great ideas. He'll probably end up writing the blog. So yeah, I'm going to volunteer for him. But I think one thing we kind of came out with through the process is to, one, and we talked about this on Monday as well, to invite discomfort in many ways. Discomfort in terms of the research we do, the questions that we ask, and how we communicate that. Between generations, between disciplines, between geographies, between political ideologies. So I think that's been, one strand through which to also reimagine space. Certainly I think one thing that we were envious of with the work that was being done in Rwanda is that they did take on addressing relationships to environments and spaces through that lens. We've started thinking a little bit about that as well, and are connecting it also to histories of activism in terms of reconceptions of nature within the context both of Kosovo, but also of these transformations from socialist or state socialism to neoliberal capitalism. So we've been thinking a little bit about ideas of activism and liquid activism, and perhaps, this, you guys might know this Bruce Lee thing about be like water, which is actually being taken up by activists in Hong Kong, in Palestine, in many other places. So I think that's one way to reimagine space, is to think about how things flow. So I really appreciated that the work with the two screens so yeah, just there's a lot going on in my head right now. So thank you for the panel, everyone.
Yeah, okay. I think we can call it a day.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
We can call it a project, not a day.
What a day that was. Intense. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah.
Okay, so just to keep everybody updated, like I said, the website is a work in progress. We will continue to update content, so please do visit the site over and over again. You'll see that it'll be changing over the next couple of weeks. And obviously to the team from ReSpace and myself and Linda and Nita and Steph and everyone, a huge thank you for everybody that's been involved and all your efforts and energy that's gone into this project. It really is greatly appreciated.
And to you, Paula, and, and Oliver, and do you know what I mean? I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Oliver, especially you.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Big thanks to all the speakers. Yeah.
Very good.
Okay, take care, everyone.
See you later, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
All right, guys.
Bye, Alex.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Alex.